I spent an afternoon recently talking to a young policy analyst who is obsessed with the idea of perfect distribution. He sat there with his tablet, scrolling through spreadsheets, convinced that human happiness could be solved like a simple algebra problem. He started with a scenario that sounded incredibly fair: a three-person society where everyone gets exactly 6 units of wealth. It was clean, balanced, and egalitarian. He looked at that 6-6-6 split with the kind of satisfaction most people reserve for a sunset. But as the conversation shifted, that clean logic started to take a chilling turn. I asked him about the utility monster, that hypothetical individual who experiences joy so intensely that a single dollar gives them more utility than $1,000 gives a beggar. He didn't blink. He leaned forward and argued that if the math showed a net gain, we were morally obligated to strip the other 2 people of everything they own to feed that one monster's appetite. He even followed the logic to its darkest corner, what's known as the Eichmann problem, where a majority derives just enough pleasure from the destruction of minority to make the total sum of happiness go up. He spoke about extermination and expropriation with the same flat, observational tone he used for tax credits. To him, the individual didn't exist. Only the total sum mattered. It left me wondering how a philosophy designed to maximize human happiness could so easily justify the most morally obnoxious acts imaginable. We like to think of utilitarianism as a tool for progress, but when you look at the distributive math, you have to ask, at what point does the greatest good become a mathematical mask for absolute horror?
That's meh. Well, it's a chilling question, and you have to admire the brutal consistency of that analyst.
I know, right? He wasn't trying to be evil, he just followed the numbers off a cliff.
And he's really holding up a mirror to a very specific, and I have to say, a very seductive way of thinking.
Oh.
It's something that has, dominated a lot of policy for the better part of a century.
That 6-6-6 split, it looks so clean on a spreadsheet. It feels like the definition of justice.
Of course. Everyone has the same. No one is suffering more than anyone else. It's balanced. But the moment you accept that core premise...
What, that the goal is just to maximize a number?
That the entire point of society is to get a number called utility as high as possible. Once you buy into that, you've opened the door to everything else you just described. The monster, the extermination, all of it.
The leap from let's all be equal to let's feed the monster happened in like 30 seconds. It felt like the same engine was driving both cars.
It is the same engine.
One's heading for this, beautiful egalitarian utopia, and the other one is heading straight into a horror movie.
But the engine is identical. It's the logic of aggregation. It's this core idea that individuals are just vessels. They're containers for happiness.
And if you can pour happiness from my container into yours to make the total volume go up,
you are morally obligated to do it. It doesn't matter who the vessel is. It doesn't matter if you worked for it, if you earned it, if you stole it, or if you're a monster who gets pleasure from watching the world burn. All that matters is the sum.
Okay, so before we get to the monsters, which we definitely have to do, we should probably unpack the fair part of it. Because that 6-6-6 split, that idea of perfect distribution, it isn't just some kid with a tablet's fantasy. It's rooted in some pretty serious economic theory.
Right. Your analyst didn't invent this over his morning coffee. He's channeling a long history of thought.
Who is he channeling?
Specifically, he's channeling a man named Abba Lerner. In 1944, Lerner wrote a book called The Economics of Control, and he laid out this concept he called distributive efficiency.
Distributive efficiency.
Exactly. And if we can just, for a moment, put aside the scary monster stuff, the logic is incredibly compelling. It's based on something that you and I and everyone listening experience every single day. It's called the law of diminishing marginal utility.
Right. I think I remember this from Econ 101. It's the pizza rule, isn't it?
It's absolutely the pizza rule. Imagine you are starving, truly starving. You haven't eaten in 2 days. I walk up and I give you 1 slice of pepperoni pizza. What's that slice worth to you?
Everything. It's survival. It's the best thing I've ever tasted in my life. The utility, the joy I get from that slice it's off the charts.
It's infinite, practically. Okay. Now, same scenario, but you've already eaten 4 slices. You're feeling pretty full. I hand you a 5th slice.
And I'll eat it, but I'm not, crying with joy. It's just another slice of pizza.
The utility has dropped significantly. Now, let's say you've somehow managed to eat an entire large pizza by yourself. You're stuffed. You feel a little sick. I hand you a 12th slice.
I don't want it. In fact, if I eat it, it's going to make me feel worse. The utility is negative now. It's a disutility.
That is the law of diminishing marginal utility. The first unit of any resource gives you the most happiness. Every single unit after that gives you less and less and less. Now, Lerner took this fundamental biological fact about us and he applied it to money. He argued that $1 is just like a slice of pizza.
So if you give $1 to someone who's homeless, it's that first slice. It buys a loaf of bread, maybe a warm drink, it's survival. The utility is enormous.
But if you give that same dollar to a billionaire,
it's the 12th slice. They don't even know they have it. It literally changes nothing about their day, their life, anything. Its utility is basically zero.
Precisely. So Lerner's argument and your analyst's argument is that if your sole goal is to maximize the total happiness of society, you are mathematically obligated to take that dollar from the billionaire where it's doing nothing and give it to the homeless person where it does everything.
And if you keep doing that.
You keep doing that, you move money from the low utility places, which are the rich people, to the high utility places, which are the poor people. And eventually you reach an equilibrium.
6-6-6 split.
Everyone ends up with the same amount. In a purely static world, a world that doesn't change, this setup maximizes the total sum of human happiness. It's mathematically perfect.
And on paper, that is so hard to argue with. It feels right. If we have a fixed pile of gold, we should spread it out so it does the most good. But that's the catch, isn't it? A fixed pile of gold.
That's the whole game right there.
My analyst friend, he was treating the economy like a pie that was already baked and just sitting on the table. He assumed the size of the pie was fixed, that it wouldn't change no matter how we decided to slice it up.
That is the fatal flaw of all static analysis. The world isn't a static pie. It's a dynamic system. It's a bakery. The pie is constantly being baked, and the people who are baking it, well, they react to how you slice it.
If you tell the bakers, no matter how hard you work, no matter how many pies you bake, you will only ever get one slice.
People stop baking. The bakery closes.
This reminds me of a story that I think just perfectly illustrates this collision between the beautiful math of distribution and the messy reality of human nature. It's about a tech collective I heard about in a digital nomad community.
A collective, so like a modern-day commune?
Kind of, yeah, for coders and designers. So try to imagine this small tech collective. They started with this radical marginal utility wealth policy. The idea was simple and, on the surface, incredibly noble.
Yes. Those who earned more had to give it to those who earned less.
Exactly. Their excess was redistributed to the newcomers or people between projects until everyone reached a comfortable baseline. The logic was pure Lerner. The last dollar matters less to a rich man than a poor one.
So they were actually implementing this theory in real life. Yeah. Pure redistribution to maximize the group's total happiness.
And for the first few months, it felt great. The newcomers had a real safety net. The vibe was communal. Everyone felt taken care of. It worked until, of course, it hit the mathematical limit. There was a developer in the group named Elias. He was the star, the heavy lifter. Every group has one. Elias was providing like 80% of the core code for the projects that actually brought money into the collective. But he started to notice something.
He looked at his bank account, I'm guessing.
He looked at his hours. He was pulling all-nighters, debugging code at 3 a.m., and he realized that every single extra hour of work he put in was, in effect, being taxed away at nearly 100% to provide leisure time for other members.
So his hard work was directly funding someone else's vacation.
And he wasn't a greedy guy, He believed in the mission at first, but the incentive mechanism just collapsed. He eventually just stopped. He stopped innovating. He started doing the bare minimum.
And the collective's income.
It plummeted. The total utility of the group crashed because the primary producer no longer had any reason to produce. I see this story as just a perfect cautionary tale about the limits of this thinking. If we ignore the basic human need for reward and incentive in the name of a perfect mathematical balance, we eventually run out of the very utility we're trying to share.
Elias isn't just the guy who got frustrated. He is a walking, talking embodiment of the efficiency-equity trade-off. This is one of the central dilemmas in all of economics.
The trade-off between a fair slice and a big pie.
You have economists, guys like James Mirrlees and Emmanuel Sayes. They've won Nobel Prizes for studying this exact problem. And they break down Elias's situation into two competing forces, what they call the mechanical effect and the behavioral effect.
And what's the mechanical effect?
The mechanical effect is what your analyst friend sees on his tablet. It's the math that assumes people are robots. It's the static analysis. It says, if Elias earns $100 and we tax him $90 to give to the poor, then we have successfully raised $90 for the poor.
It assumes Elias will just keep earning that $100 no matter what. It treats his productivity as a fixed object.
It's as a number in a spreadsheet. But Elias isn't a robot. He has feelings. He gets tired. He asks himself why he's working until 2 a.m. if the rewards are going to someone else who's, playing video games in the common room.
Which brings us to the behavioral effect.
Action. When you tax labor too highly, or when redistribution becomes 100% efficient like it did in that collective, the labor supply contracts. Elias decides to work less. He decides to stop taking on the hard projects. He decides, you know what, I'm going to go surfing instead of coding this weekend.
And when he goes surfing, the money that the collective was counting on just disappears.
It vanishes. The $90 you thought you were going to redistribute, it's gone. Because Elias never earned the $100 in the first place. This is the great irony of that pure 666 logic. By trying to guarantee everyone got an equal slice, the collective ensured that the total pie shrank down to maybe a single cupcake.
So all this work by people like Saez on optimal labor income taxation, it's basically a search for the sweet spot.
It's a mathematical quest to answer the question, how much can we take from Elias to help the poor without making Elias quit his job?
You've got to leave him with enough of his own banana that he still wants to climb the tree.
It's a crude way to put it, but it's absolutely accurate. If you ignore that, let's call it the chimp part of our brain, the part that wants a reward for its effort, you end up destroying the very economy you're trying to make more fair.
But okay, let's go back to my intro. Because as dangerous as it is to ignore incentives, there's a much, much darker side to this utilitarian logic.
The utility monster.
The utility monster. We've talked about leveling everyone down to 666, but what if the math tells us to do the opposite? What if it tells us to pile everything up on one person to make the distribution 1,000,000?
What if there is someone out there who is just so good at being happy that mathematically they deserve everything?
It sounds completely absurd when you say it out loud, the idea that one person could feel 1,000 times more intensely than me. But when I pushed the analyst on this, he didn't back down an inch. He just said, if the math works, the math works. This is Robert Nozick's famous thought experiment, isn't it?
Nozick created the utility monster as a way to basically blow up utilitarianism from the inside. He said, okay, let's take your premise seriously. Imagine there is a being, a monster, who gets 100 units of pleasure from eating a cookie. You, a normal person, you only get 1 unit of pleasure.
So if I eat the cookie, the total happiness of the universe goes up by 1. If the monster eats my cookie, the total happiness goes up by 100.
Correct. Yeah. Therefore, to a pure utilitarian, it is a moral crime for you to eat that cookie. You are actively destroying 99 units of potential happiness in the world. You are, in effect, a happiness vandal.
Okay, that's bad enough. But what if the monster gets, say, 1,000 units of pleasure from, I don't know, killing me and taking my house?
Then mathematically, your death is a net good for the universe. It is a moral imperative.
That is absolutely horrifying because that logic justifies anything. It justifies slavery, genocide, torture, as long as the winner enjoys it enough to outweigh the suffering of the loser. But does this monster actually exist? Is it just a philosopher's ghost story to scare students, or could there be a real one?
Interesting. There's a very strong counter-argument that a biological utility monster is actually impossible. And it goes right back to the pizza.
The law of diminishing marginal utility.
It applies to everyone, even to monsters. Even if I gave Jeff Bezos another $1 billion, he doesn't get 1 billion times happier. His happiness meter barely moves.
This is the idea of the hedonic treadmill, right?
Yes, the hedonic treadmill, and what's known as logarithmic happiness. All the research we have on this consistently shows that happiness doesn't scale in a straight line. It doesn't scale linearly. It scales logarithmically.
Not logarithmically.
Think of it like a staircase, where every step you want to climb is twice as high as the one before it. So to get that first step of happiness, to go from miserable to, okay, maybe you need $1,000. But to get the second step, to go from okay to good, you don't need another 1,000. You might need 10,000.
And the third step might cost 100,000.
And the 10th step might cost 100 million. The more you have, the ridiculously harder it becomes to buy even a tiny bit more happiness. There's an asymptote, a ceiling to how happy any one human organism can be. We max out. We adapt.
So because of this biological limit, we're safe from a real biological utility monster. No single person can ever enjoy resources so much that it would mathematically justify starving everyone else.
Biology saves us from Nozick's thought experiment.
Wow.
We don't have to worry about a super being coming to eat all our cookies.
Okay, that's a relief. But, and this feels like a really big but, We might not have biological monsters, but haven't we created institutional ones?
That is the pivotal question of our deep dive today. We've moved from the theoretical math of happiness to the practical engineering of society. And when you try to engineer well-being on a massive scale, you create systems that can act remarkably like that monster.
So,
They consume individual agency, they consume freedom, all in the name of maximizing the greater good.
this brings us to a concept that, frankly, I find even more unsettling than the 666 spreadsheet. It's this idea of the therapeutic state.
A term coined by the psychiatrist Thomas Szasz.
Right. And on the surface, it sounds wonderful. Therapeutic, who doesn't want therapy? Who doesn't want to feel better? It sounds like a government that really cares about us, about our well-being.
And that is exactly how it seduces you. Szasz was drawing a very, very sharp distinction between the old way of governing and this new way. The old way he called the nanny state, or you could call it the punitive state.
The nanny state, that's like, don't smoke in here, wear your seatbelt, pay your taxes, or you go to jail.
Exactly. It's authoritarian, but it's clear. It tells you what to do. And if you disobey, it punishes you.
Right.
But here is the absolutely crucial difference. It treats you as an adult. It treats you as a moral agent who made a choice, even if it was a bad choice. You broke the law, so here is your fine.
Okay, so how is the therapeutic state different?
The therapeutic state doesn't tell you what to do. It tells you what to think and what to feel. It views any kind of deviance not as a crime or a sin or a choice, but as an illness.
So if I smoke or I gamble or I'm just, I don't know, chronically disagreeable, I'm not bad, I'm sick.
You're sick. You need treatment. Shoplifting isn't a crime. It's a symptom of compulsion, a cry for help. Holding unconventional political beliefs isn't dissent. It's evidence of paranoia or maladjustment or a phobia that needs to be cured.
Ow.
Szasz made this brilliant parallel. He said that just as the old theological state used to swallow every aspect of human life under the single guise of religion, nothing fell outside the province of God. The modern therapeutic state swallows everything under the guise of health. Nothing falls outside the province of medicine.
You have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Isn't that better? I mean, isn't it more humane to treat a shoplifter as someone who needs psychological help rather than just throwing them in a dungeon? Why is this a monster?
On an individual level, it often feels more humane, yes.
Yeah.
You have to consider the cost to liberty. If you are charged with a crime, you have rights. You have the right to a lawyer. You have the right to a trial. You can stand up in court and say, I am not guilty, or even, yes, I did it, and here's why I believe it was right. You are a citizen facing the power of the state.
But if you're diagnosed,
What can you do? You can't argue with a diagnosis in the same way. You can't appeal a medical fact about your own personality. If the state's expert says you're not a political dissident, you're suffering from oppositional defiant disorder, you lose your political voice. You become a patient.
and patients don't have rights, they have treatment plans.
Exactly. It completely depoliticizes citizenship. It strips away your legitimacy as an actor in the world. You're not a rebel with a cause. You're just a broken machine that needs to be fixed.
And the people doing the fixing, they're not police officers with badges.
No. They are what we can call social personnel. They're clinicians, therapists, social workers, HR departments, school guidance counselors. They are the soft, smiling enforcers of the therapeutic state.
This reminds me of a story that really brought this idea home for me. It's about a young architect named Clara.
Okay, tell me about Clara.
So I was reading a series of forum posts recently about this woman, Clara, a brilliant architectural designer living in a city that had basically fully embraced what it called therapeutic governance.
Therapeutic governance.
In this system, every single public policy, from parks to housing to transportation, is tuned to maximize the collective emotional safety and well-being of the population. It's a real-world iteration of Bentham's utility monster, where the monster is the feeling of the cloud.
So the goal of the city wasn't beauty or efficiency or grandeur, but emotional safety.
That was the #1 metric. And Clara had spent years mastering her craft. She wanted to build landmarks, buildings that were bold, maybe a little challenging, things that made you stop and think. But her department, the city planning department, started rejecting all of her designs.
Not because of structural flaws, I take it.
Oh, they were rejected because they were, and I'm quoting here, too challenging or not sufficiently inclusive of the median aesthetic comfort.
Median aesthetic comfort. That is one of the most terrifying phrases I have ever heard.
They literally told her that the sharp angles on her buildings might induce anxiety in vulnerable populations. They told her that her bold color choices were, quote, aesthetically aggressive. The institution was prioritizing a flat, bland, average level of satisfaction for the many over the exceptional agency and talent of the one.
So they were smoothing out the variance. They were actively trying to get to that 6-6 split, but for feelings. Maximizing the aggregate utility by shaving off any outliers, good or bad.
And Clara, eventually, she just stopped drawing altogether. She gave up. She realized that in a world where the state acts as this giant utility maximizing machine, individual merit, individual genius, it's not a feature, it's a bug. It's just a statistical noise that needs to be smoothed out for the sake of the average. Yeah. And you just have to try to imagine the quiet tragedy of that. A society where no one is allowed to fail, sure, but because of that, no one is ever permitted to truly excel. As a journalist covering these shifts, I find it so chilling. We're trading the peaks of human achievement for a long, flat valley of comfortable mediocrity. And in doing so, we're losing the very agency that makes life worth living.
Clara's story is a perfect textbook case of what you could call the tyranny of normalization. In the therapeutic state, the ultimate goal isn't excellence. It's not even really happiness in the joyful sense. The goal is functioning. The goal is normalcy.
And if you fall outside that bell curve of normal, whether you're too slow or like Clara, you're way too fast, you get clipped, you get brought back to the mean.
You get diagnosed. And this connects directly to what sociologists call labeling theory and what critics call disease mongering. The boundaries of what counts as an illness just keep expanding outwards. Well, 50 years ago, if you were a kid with a ton of energy who couldn't sit still, you were just a high energy kid. Now you have ADHD. If you were shy and awkward at parties, you were just shy. Now you have social anxiety disorder.
And once you have the label, you need the treatment, the medication, the therapy.
Right. And by constantly expanding the definitions of illness to include what were once considered normal, everyday personal variations, the state and the medical establishment expand their jurisdiction. They create millions more Claris people whose unique, sharp edges are pathologized and sanded down to fit the mold.
It's an invasion of the private sphere.
It's the ultimate invasion. To be a free citizen, you need a private space. A space where you're allowed to be weird, where you're allowed to be wrong, where you can be unhealthy if you so choose. When the state enters that private space with a prescription pad to fix you for your own good, it eats your autonomy alive.
So we've seen how this utilitarian logic can hurt the high-achieving individual. Elias stops working, Clara stops creating. But it doesn't just stop there, does it? This spreadsheet mentality, this obsessive drive to optimize everything for utility, it also tears apart the fabric of our communities.
Well, this is where the utilitarian calculus often fails most spectacularly. It has a huge blind spot. It tends to view society as just a collection of isolated individuals like atoms bouncing around in a vacuum. But we know that's not how human beings actually live and thrive.
We're not atoms, we're neighbors, we're families, we're part of something. And I saw this conflict play out so clearly in a documentary snippet I watched about a neighborhood in East London.
What happened there?
It was this old neighborhood, deep roots, not wealthy, but incredibly connected. You know the kind of place. And the local council, applying a strictly Benthamite utilitarian logic, did a study. They determined that the total utility of the area would increase by 40% if they demolished a whole block of old, quote, inefficient family-run shops.
What?
A high-density, automated logistics hub. A giant warehouse.
The spreadsheet view of the world strikes again. The hub brings jobs, more tax revenue, supply chain efficiency. The numbers go up.
On paper, the numbers were perfect. More jobs, a higher tax yield, more utility for the city's economy. But what the spreadsheet could never, ever capture was the organic social cohesion, the invisible stuff.
What?
Like the way the elderly butcher knew the names of every kid on the block, the way the woman who ran the corner shop would keep an eye on the older residents, make sure they were okay, the trust.
The invisible utility, the social capital.
Actually. And once the hub was built, the total happiness index for the area, measured by income, it technically rose. But the people who lived there said they felt like ghosts in their own neighborhood. Institutional trust just evaporated overnight because the residents realized they weren't people to the council. They were just variables in an equation that didn't value their history or their connections at all.
That's a brutal story.
I've spent a lot of time looking at these kinds of urban developments, and it's such a stark reminder that when we treat society like a math problem, we often solve for the variables but completely lose the soul of the community. It's hard to stay neutral when you see how efficiency can become just another word for structural decay.
That is a heartbreaking but absolutely perfect example. It illustrates a fundamental conflict between two very different kinds of utilitarianism. You have the classic Benthamite view, which is what the council used. It's all about the aggregates. Maximize the cash, maximize the jobs, maximize the square footage.
But that view is clearly missing something fundamental about what it means to be human.
It's missing what the social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, drawing on the work of the great sociologist Emil Durkheim, calls Durkheimian utilitarianism. Durkheim argued that human beings are homo duplex.
Homo duplex, meaning a double man, two-level man.
Exactly. Two-level man. Level one. We are about 90% chimp. We're competitive, we're selfish, we're individualistic. We want to maximize our own personal gain. That's the part of us that the council was measuring. The jobs, the money.
But what's level two?
Level two. We are about 10% B. We have a hive switch deep in our brains. We have a desperate biological need to belong to a group that is larger and more meaningful than our own selfish interests. We crave loyalty, sanctity, shared symbols, shared history.
The butcher knowing the kids' names, that's the B part. That's the hive.
That invisible web of relationships and trusts is what generates social capital. And pure one-dimensional Benthamite utilitarianism is blind to it. It can only see the chimp. So it tears down the hive in order to sell the wax for profit.
And when you destroy the hive, what happens to the bees who live there?
You get anomie. That is Durkheim's most famous and important concept. It's a state of normlessness. It's what happens when the social structures that give our lives meaning and context dissolve. People feel Yes. Jeremy Bentham, the father of utilitarianism, let's not forget, designed what he thought was the perfect prison. It was a circular building with all the inmate cells arranged along the outer wall. In the very center, there was a single guard tower.
From which the guard could see into every cell.
But the genius of it and the absolute horror of it was that the inmates couldn't see the guard in the tower. The windows were shuttered. They never knew if they were being watched at any given moment.
So they had to act as if they were being watched 24/7. They policed themselves.
It creates what Bentham called a state of conscious and permanent visibility. It's the ultimate efficiency in social control. You don't need chains or whips. You just need the power of the gaze.
And in our modern world, the gaze is the algorithm. It's the keystroke logger on your work computer. It's the corporate wellness survey. It's the social credit score.
And this entire style of management is deeply rooted in what the management theorist Douglas McGregor called Theory X.
Theory X versus Theory Y. I have heard of this.
Theory X is the assumption that people, whether they're workers or citizens, are naturally lazy, untrustworthy, and selfish. They are chimps and only chimps. Therefore, you need the panopticon. You need constant external control. You need carrots and sticks. You need to watch them every second to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do.
And Theory Y is the opposite.
Theory Y assumes that people are intrinsically motivated, that they want to do a good job, that they want to contribute, that they are trustworthy. It trusts the B nature inside us. It's the belief that if you give people autonomy and a shared purpose, they will build something amazing on their own.
But the therapeutic state, the modern data-driven workplace, they feel profoundly Theory X.
They are deeply, deeply Theory X. They operate from a fundamental position of distrust. They don't trust you to govern yourself. They don't trust you to be healthy on your own. So they introduce layer after layer of external controls, surveillance, mandates, nudges, regulations.
And here's the really perverse part. When you treat people like they can't be trusted, they often stop being trustworthy. I was reading about the crowding out effect.
Oh, this is one of the most fascinating findings in social science.
It's the idea that if you take someone who is intrinsically motivated to do something good, they have that Theory Y motivation, and you start paying them for it or punishing them if they don't do it, you actually ruin that good intention.
The classic study on this, the one everyone cites, was by a sociologist named Richard Titmuss. He wrote a book called The Gift Relationship, and he compared the blood donation systems in the UK and the US.
At the time, the UK system was purely voluntary and unpaid. In the US, a lot of the supply came from people who were paid for their blood.
Right. And logically, from a pure spreadsheet, Theory X point of view, paying people should get you more blood. You're creating a financial incentive.
Of course, that's what the numbers would say.
But Titmuss found the complete opposite. When you start paying people for blood, you turn a moral act, a gift to the community, an act of civic virtue, into a low-paying, unpleasant transaction. You crowd out the public spirit. People stop donating because it's the right thing to do. They start assessing it as a bad job and decide it's not worth their time.
So by trying to optimize the system with money, you actually rot the moral core of that system and end up with less of what you wanted.
Exactly. And this applies perfectly to the therapeutic state. The more the state intervenes to manage our well-being with its panopticon, the more it crowds out our own capacity to manage ourselves and care for each other. If the state is officially responsible for my neighbor's well-being, then maybe I don't have to be. It erodes the public spirit it claims to be protecting.
It's a vicious cycle. The state treats us like untrustworthy machines, which is theory X, so we lose our intrinsic motivation. That's the crowding out effect, which then makes us act more like selfish machines, which in the state's eyes justifies even more control.
That is the quiet tragedy of high modernist social engineering. We try to optimize the humanity right out of the human.
So we've covered a massive amount of ground here today in this deep dive. We started with what seemed like a simple, fair math problem, that 6-6-6 split.
We did. And we saw almost immediately how that clean, beautiful logic completely crumbles when you introduce the messy reality of human incentives. You can't just move numbers around on a spreadsheet because people react. As we saw with Elias, if you tax the producer too much, the producer stops producing and the whole pie shrinks for everyone.
And then we flipped it around. We looked at the other side of the coin, the utility monster, the idea that maybe we should sacrifice everything for the greater good. And we saw how that terrifying idea has mutated into the modern therapeutic state. We saw Clara, the brilliant architect, getting crushed by a system that values normalization over excellence. We traded our agency for a diagnosis.
And finally, we saw how that same impulse to optimize a community, like in that neighborhood in East London, can completely strip away the social glue that holds us together. We saw that treating humans purely as selfish chimps who need to be managed by a panopticon ends up destroying the bee inside us, that part that craves connection and history and trust.
It really seems like the core lesson here is that while maximizing well-being is, of course, a noble goal, you simply cannot engineer it from the top down without losing something absolutely vital in the process. You can't solve human happiness like it's an algebra problem.
We have to recognize that these grand projects of distributive efficiency or high modernist social engineering always ignore the sheer complexity of human nature. We value our autonomy, we value our history, we even value the struggle of doing things for ourselves. And when a system takes all that away from you in order to hand you a perfect outcome, it isn't saving you. It's hollowing out the very essence of the human experience.
It really makes you rethink what happiness actually is. Is it just a number on a national well-being index, or is it something far more complex and, messy?
It's definitely messier, and it's probably much harder to measure than any policy analyst with a spreadsheet wants to admit.
There is a concept in behavioral economics called loss aversion, the idea that we will fight much harder to keep what we have than to gain something new. It explains why a person whose wealth is cut in half is far more miserable than a person whose wealth is doubled is happy, even if they both end up with the exact same $1 million. It suggests that our happiness isn't just a number on a spreadsheet, it's a story about where we came from and what we've lost along the way. And that makes you realize if the state or a utility monster strips you of your autonomy, your community, or your history to simply hand you a check for maximum happiness, you aren't actually gaining anything. You're just being paid for what was stolen.